Hello, Lions Nation, and welcome to another edition of Believe in Lions, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Trevor Thompson. Glad to have you along this week as we finish up our three-part series on the NFC North, breaking down the other teams in the division. We've already done the Chicago Bears. We've already done the Green Bay Packers, and today we'll wrap things up with Matthew Coller, the host of the Purple Insider, who will give us the insights on the Minnesota Vikings. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us on the show this week. What are you most looking forward to about this year's edition of the Minnesota Vikings?
I think number one is going to be a shocking answer for your audience is what's going to happen at quarterback, right? I mean, we're going into training camp. Technically, there is a quarterback competition. That doesn't mean there's equal chances between Kyler Murray and JJ McCarthy to win the job, but how it plays out through the season, I'm sure you're familiar. Vikings history has a lot of crazy twists and turns at the quarterback position, from Case Keenum going to the NFC Championship game to Randall Cunningham leading one of the best offenses of all time after he had retired and then come out of retirement to play for the Vikings. So is this going to be the latest in the run of historical quarterbacks who started somewhere else and ended up on the Vikings, and then their weapons and their coaching drove them to success? Or is this going to be the time that it doesn't work with Kyler Murray? Will JJ McCarthy end up on the field? Will he? I mean, if he wins the competition, I think that would be great for the Vikings organization since they drafted him, and I'm sure they would love to see him take a huge step forward. But even if he doesn't, do they trade him? That seems unlikely. Does he end up playing because of Kyler Murray's injury history? There's just so many questions at that quarterback position. And then, Kevin O'Connell goes from the darling of the NFL in terms of coaches in 2024 to suddenly under a heck of a lot of pressure to do it again because they decided to, let the Super Bowl winning quarterback go in free agency. So I'm not going deep in the weeds with this one. We have no idea how this quarterback situation is going to play out, and it will be fascinating to watch throughout even just training camp and then into the season. Here's what I want you to talk me into, Trevor, is you have the Terrion Arnold issue. You have multiple very serious injuries that happened last year for key defensive backs for the Detroit Lions. I want you to talk me into the Detroit Lions secondary being okay, because right now that's one of my biggest questions about Detroit and what they're going to be able to do next year.
Well, I'm going to tell you why, and that's because this next man up attitude that this Lions team has had to deal with over the last couple of seasons, and now 3 in a row coming in, the injury bug that has bitten this team has given guys opportunities that they might not otherwise have, because when you've got a Kirby Joseph back there that's healthy, and you've got a Brian Branch back there that's healthy, other guys are not going to see the field because those guys are elite. Now they're not going to be in there. Other guys are dying to step up and show what they can do. And in the draft, they got this kid, Keith Abney, who is going to prove that he is ready for the big time. He is ready for the NFL. They love his upside. Then you've got Rock Yassin. When he had the opportunities last season, he also played very, very well in the role that he was given going forward. Ines Rakestraw, out of that same 2024 draft that Terrion Arnold was a part of, hasn't had the opportunity to get on the field because of injuries. So he's dying in a prove-it year to show that he can stay healthy and be a difference maker on the field. And then you've got other guys who are stepping in. They brought in Chuck Clark, a veteran as well, who's going to get some opportunities. Christian Izine is going to get some opportunities to show what he can do. And he was one of the guys that ESPN said look out for as far as this year's Lions defense is concerned. So all these guys are going to get opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. I believe that Kelvin Shepard in his second year as defensive coordinator is going to show a little more comfort. He's going to challenge these guys. I think these guys are going to rise to the occasion, and he's the type of guy that these guys are going to run through walls for. So I expect a lot out of him in his second year as well. So given all those factors and the opportunity that is presented in front of these guys right now, and the fact that they did finish last in the division last year, they've got a chip on their shoulders. Everybody is going to step up. This Lions team is going to return to the top of the division, and you're going to see a secondary that is out to help that happen. So that's my going to convince you with those kind of arguments for those kinds of players to have this opportunity going into this season.
Trevor, I love your conviction right off the bat. Like you were really selling hard on there. However, I'm not so sure that I'm completely convinced here because Branch and Joseph are such key players. I mean, they're two of the best in the NFL. What is the update on their health? Like, are they expected to be there for training camp, or what's the prognosis for those two players?
Well, it's really tough to say. I don't really foresee them starting training camp, especially Brian Branch coming off of that injury that he had near the end of last season. That's going to take some time. Hopefully, by the time Christmas rolls around, he'll be back and be able to make a difference on the field. It is really, really tough to tell with Kirby Joseph exactly what is going on with that knee. And it could be something that's going to be a problem for him the rest of his career, not just coming into this season. A lot of question marks about what is really going on there, how he's going to deal with it. It could be a pain management thing. It could be totally disabling for this guy going forward. We really don't know. So it's really going to be an interesting story to follow as far as he's concerned. He paid to be the best at his position in the league. I mean, the money's there. The incentive is there. He's still a young guy, so hopefully he'll be able to break through and get back to where he was, but he's going to have to deal with pain management along the way. So we're going to find out exactly where he's at as training camp and then the regular season and the preseason and regular season roll on. So those are not the definitive answers, but the latest update as far as what's going on with those guys.
I mean, I think if there's long-term concern, that should be really worrisome because he's such a huge key player for that Detroit secondary. Here's the other part that I'm not totally sold on yet, but I can be a little bit more convinced is on Kelvin Sheppard. At the beginning of the year, I thought some really good things from Kelvin Sheppard. It looked like it was a little more versatile of a defense than we saw under Aaron Glenn, where it felt like they just played man-to-man all the time and opposing offenses kind of knew what was coming. I thought that Sheppard was mixing and matching a little more. And then as the season went along and those injuries started to rack up, they had some of the same issues that Detroit's defense had under Aaron Glenn. What were you able to learn about Kelvin Sheppard last year when you have such a mash unit of, players on the field? I mean, it's really hard to be a great defensive coordinator when you have so many limitations.
Yeah, I think what I learned about it was the attitude that he took as a player and the attitude he's bringing as a defensive coordinator right now. It's just no excuses. Get the job done. You're here to do a job. You're in the NFL. Get the job done. Next man up. Here's your opportunity. So I really think that along the way, though, he had to learn not how to scheme, but just really how to work with the parts that he had. He was expecting to have those guys we mentioned as far as the safety position. He expected those guys to be on the field. They weren't. So he had to really figure out what these players are and then how to work with what he had. And I'm not sure he really knew until he knew what he had. But like I said, Rock Ya-Sin was a guy who had an opportunity and stepped up and made the most of it. Now coming into the second year with him, he's going to know what this guy can do. And he's going to be able to challenge him in different ways and give these guys different opportunities. Up front, they've they've really gotten a lot more depth. DJ Wanham was a guy they brought in to play the edge. They drafted Derek Moore from the University of Michigan to play the edge. Jimmy Rolder, they drafted also from the University of Michigan to play at the linebacker spot. Now, they did lose Alex Anzalone along the way, but Jack Campbell signed another big money contract. These guys, he's got a little more depth with. I think that he's got reinforcements to play with. He's going to scheme differently up front. He might load the box. He might bring guys back. He's going to have different sort of looks to throw this year that he didn't have last year because they did not have the depth. So I think he's going to use that depth to his advantage in year two, plus the experience of having done it for a year and use those sort of things to his advantage in year two. So I really expect a lot from this defense.
So I have two more follow-ups on this.
Yes, sir.
One is, you've been in the media there for a long time. You ever seen anything like this Terrion Arnold story? Like, what the heck, man?
The short answer is no, but I just shake my head and scratch my head as to how a kid like this in a what was going to be a big year for him, because he's had injury problems, he's had penalty problems, he's really not played up to snuff as far as being the first rounder that they hoped him to be. So this was a big year for him to come in, stay healthy, and be a difference maker on the field, show where he's at on the learning curve from the mistakes he's made over his first couple of seasons, and really rise to the occasion here in year three. But dealing with this and putting yourself in this position, I really don't understand. And we talked about it a bit before we started the show. Who goes to the cops and reports a crime and then goes and snatches up the people that he's reporting and drawing that kind of attention to yourself and then end up possibly putting yourself in prison for the rest of your life if all these charges go the wrong way? I really don't understand what he's doing. The Lions immediately released him. I've seen online where 3 other teams are possibly interested in his services going forward. I don't know how the NFL is going to react to that. But to be at this stage of life, to be that young, to have all that blue sky ahead of you as far as your NFL career goes, the dollars that are to be made, and just what you can do, putting your family in a situation to be taken care of for the rest of their lives, why you would jeopardize the rest of your life behind bars, that's a head scratcher.
Yeah, it is bizarre. I mean, we've seen a lot of off-field stuff. There are thousands of NFL players, and not all of them make the best decisions. But this is a new one. Life in prison potentially is not something you hear very often. The other follow-up question was, well, do you think that it hurts the Lions? Because my thought was, this is a crazy story, and we're all kind of gawking at it and turtlenecking about it, but he wasn't playing very well. I mean, this is a guy who I think has been a bust so far and hasn't really even showed a ton of potential along the way, at least from my viewpoint. So was there talk of like he should take the next step this year? This is a big year for him. Were there expectations?
Oh yeah. And he was going to be challenged. His job was going to be challenged coming into training camp, and Dan Campbell made that clear. He's got to earn that starting spot back. And Matthew, the irony of the whole thing is if you go back to the year before 2023 in the offseason, the Lions signed Cam Sutton to be that cornerback. He ended up getting arrested on a domestic dispute case, and the Lions released him. So then they draft Terrion Arnold to be his replacement, and now they're dealing with this from Terrion Arnold, the guy that was supposed to be the guy who replaced the guy. So a lot of questions, a lot was expected. It was a critical draft spot, a critical pick at that point in the draft for the Lions because of what they expected and what the need was for this team going forward. Now they're back there trying to fill that need again. But the fact of the matter is, coming into camp, he was going to have to earn that spot back. There were going to be challengers for that job in camp. And now one of those guys who was going to challenge will get the role.
It's one of those things where I go back to all the time draft luck. Everyone would have taken Terrion Arnold at that point. And then
absolutely.
Right. I mean, I don't think anybody questioned that draft pick when it happened. And then this for Brad Holmes is pretty bad draft luck. I'm going to declare myself not really talked into this. I still think the secondary of the Detroit Lions. I mean, you did a great job. You tried your hardest, but it's like, can this rookie step up? You know, they got this other guy and there's a serious injury and there's someone who's been released because of armed robbery. And it's like, I'm not sure I'm totally there yet, Trevor. What would you like me to talk you into?
Talk me into the fact that the Minnesota Vikings will not finish in last place in this division, despite the fact that they really aren't sure who the quarterback is going to be right now. And they've got a lot of questions to answer in other parts of their game, that they aren't going to be the basement dwellers in the NFC North this year. Talk me into it.
Yeah. Right now, our sponsor, FanDuel, has the Vikings as plus 500 to win the division, which is 4th out of 4. So they are expected in the outside world to finish last. But, you know, when you said they're not really sure who their quarterback is, I would say they're probably somewhat sure who their quarterback is going to be. Otherwise, I don't think you go out and get Kyler Murray. There will be a quarterback competition. You never know. And I wouldn't want to offend your audience with not giving JJ McCarthy a chance here. But when we look at the Vikings group of weapons and we look at their coaching and we compare that to what Kyler Murray has had in the past, it's just night and day. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury has, gotten fired in Arizona and then went to Washington, coached for 2 years there. They decide to move on. I think that his offense has always been pretty limiting and maybe lacking that next level where Kevin O'Connell, when he has had his starting quarterbacks, is 31-11, veteran starting quarterbacks. So Sam Darnold or Kirk Cousins. I think that really tells a story. Now, was JJ McCarthy ready for it last year? Of course not. And that impacted everybody. Mm-hmm. But Kyler Murray has played at either a average or above average level for his entire career. Has it been always at the expectation of the number 1 overall draft pick? No, it most certainly hasn't. Probably only was for 1 year. But in 2024, he was the 12th best quarterback in the league by PFF. If he's the 12th best quarterback in the league and has Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, an improved offensive scheme around him, especially Jefferson, though. I mean, he was playing with somebody in Marvin Harrison Jr. that was supposed to be like Jefferson. Right. And just did not turn out to be that guy. And so he really hasn't. He's had one good receiver for his entire career. He's had one of the worst franchises in football. I mean, truly, it reminds me of like no offense to the Lions organization, but during Matthew Stafford's time there, they weren't the most competent, I would say. Kind of reminds me a little of Stafford going to Los Angeles, and all of a sudden you're at one of the better organizations in football, have some great coaching, better weapons, all that sort of stuff. that doesn't mean that I think that Kyler Murray is going to win the Super Bowl or that he's going to go from being the 12th to 15th best quarterback to, what Matthew Stafford has done with the Los Angeles Rams. But I do think that when the Vikings have reached a baseline of certain quarterback play, they have been very, very competitive. And so I think that they can be a top 10-ish, top 12-ish type of offense. And on defense, Brian Flores is going to have to do a lot of work to get them back to where they were last year after they lost some parts. But I think a part of this argument, though, is how flawed the NFC North really is, that it should be considered anybody's game. I think it's
flawed. It's anybody's game, but I don't think it's anybody's game because it's flawed. I think because the competition is that stiff. They were the only division in the league last year that didn't have a team below 500. So I think it's a very tough division, but I'm interested in your word flawed. From what perspective, Matthew?
Well, I think when you go through every single team, you can look at Chicago, and they let a lot of defensive players go, and they didn't really replace them on the front seven. I think that their defense overall is pretty mediocre unless they get 30 interceptions again. And I'm not entirely sold on Caleb Williams suddenly becoming a lot more accurate. I think he's going to be an erratic quarterback. With Green Bay, they're the Micah Parsons show on defense. When he was out, they're a terrible defense last year. And what move did they make to change that? Right. And I also think that there's a ton of pressure on Matt LaFleur. Their offensive line isn't that great. So can they lean on the run game like they have before? And with Detroit, we just talked about some of the secondary issues. They seems to always have injuries on defense. And is there kind of a ceiling on what they can be offensively, because they do not have the offensive line that they had a couple of years ago that was dominating to the point where Jared Goff felt like he was never under pressure. So I look at all these teams as absolutely capable of winning the division, absolutely capable of winning 12 games, especially playing the NFC South, which I think is going to help everybody. Detroit's schedule is really, really favorable, as I'm sure that you guys have heard and talked about throughout this offseason. But I also think none of these teams are perfect. None of these teams match up with like the Rams or the Seahawks, which means a lot of it might come down to who stays healthy, who has the best field goal luck, the best special teams, like all the little things that kind of play into that. And I mean, look at that game between Detroit and Minnesota last year in Detroit, where kind of came down to the special teams, right? And Miles Price getting a big return and setting up JJ McCarthy and so forth. So I think that's what all the games in the NFC North are going to come down to, which if it's that close between all the teams and Kyler Murray plays like a top 12 quarterback, I think the Vikings have just as good of a chance. I would go 25% across the board for every team having an equal chance to win the division.
But have you convinced me? Have you talked?
Have I convinced you?
Have you talked me into the fact that they aren't going to be the team that finishes last in the division?
I mean, I think just with the fact that they have an equal chance, I think, to win the division as anybody else.
Okay.
And they do have, I would argue, the best defensive coordinator in the entire NFL. And they have probably a top 3 or 4 group of offensive weapons. They're getting their left tackle back to full health. They have, I think, an improved run scheme with a couple of the coaching changes that they've made to identify their issues with the run game last year. I mean, I think that they could be just as good as where they were last year, except for last year they had about the 28th best quarterback play in the league. I think they could have about the 13th best quarterback play in the league. And they went 9-8 and by the way, beat the Lions, twice. So I don't, that doesn't scream to me that this team should be last in the division when you have the coaching of this level and the weapons of this level.
I am fading the Packers this season. Similar sounds like you are as well. And I've got to go back to that Christmas Day game between the Vikings and the Lions last year. We had about 15 of our family members over to my mom's for Christmas. I bought everybody a Lions hoodie. So we were all decked out in a different Lions hoodie to watch the game. I was all psyched up. I just started the podcast last year. So I'm doing a Lions podcast. The Lions are going to get to the playoffs. They're going to play on Christmas Day. It's going to be a big game. We're all going to wear hoodies. We're going to cheer for the Lions. And the Minnesota Vikings ruined our Christmas Day.
Yeah.
So that's my story about the Lions and the Vikings last year. I'll be really interested in these games this year because, as you said, it is up for grabs in this division. I really do believe it is the toughest division in football. I do believe it's up for grabs, and I think that the Vikings have just as good a chance of not finishing last as anybody else. How surprised were we that the Lions finished last year? They, in my opinion, however, are going to go from worst to first this year. And in the last 25 years, 21 teams in the divisions have done that in divisional football. So I think the Lions will do it again this year. That's my prediction there. And who will finish last? I think it's up for grabs. Very interesting. What are some key losses and key additions as far as this year's edition of the Vikings is concerned? To tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that losing Jonathan Grenard is probably the biggest one. I mean, mostly this roster has maintained their key pieces, and their general ethos of the offseason was, if we just get better quarterback play and run everything else back, which makes a lot of sense, except for the defensive line is going to be quite a bit different. They are banking on Caleb Banks. Am I right? Being ready to play right away. And so they're also banking on Dallas Turner to take a step forward from where he was last year, where he emerged in the second half of the season and ended up leading the team in sacks. And overall, like, the arrow was pointing way up for Dallas Turner. And the fact that they were able to trade Jonathan Grenard, I think, shows their belief in Dallas Turner as their former first round pick, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. I mean, that's still, up in the air, is a big question. And then their defensive tackle room, where last year you saw in those two games against the Lions, there were two of the better games played by Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen. And those guys both end up being cap casualties. So they go to, what is it? Cincinnati for Jonathan Allen, and maybe Green Bay for Javon Hargrave. So those guys are gone. Jonathan Grenard is gone. That unit ended up turning out to be really good overall. So now you're asking young players. Dominique Orange, they drafted in the third round. I mentioned Caleb Banks, who is talked about a lot as a boomer bust type of prospect. Is he going to be ready right away? He didn't play a ton of college football because of injuries holding him back. So then it's other guys that you got to kind of hope are ready or take the next step. Levi Drake Rodriguez, Jalen Redmond's been a really good player for them, but there's got to be even another gear there, I think, if he's going to take that mantle up. And health is a big issue too. Cashman was hurt last year. Van Ginkel was hurt last year. And the biggest loss at this moment, we're not 100% sure where this is going to go, Trevor, but is Harrison Smith. Is Harrison Smith going to come back to the Vikings at some point late in training camp and just say, hey, everybody, I'm back? Or is he done and he's ultimately going to decide to retire? We don't know that yet, and he hasn't told anybody. So we're kind of in wait and see mode, but nobody knows better than Lions fans what a nightmare Harrison Smith is to play against. I mean, last year, he tortured Jared Goff last year with all the different deception, coming up to the line of scrimmage, dropping back, changing coverages, all that sort of stuff, blitzing off the edge, which he has been so effective at for his career. So there are a lot of question marks in terms of personnel on the defensive side. The offensive side is basically, hey, everybody's back with a quarterback that should be better than what they had last year. But those are the big questions. And we're really kind of leaning into the idea that Brian Flores can elevate everything if we're making a projection like that they're not going to be last, or that even that they're going to be first. A lot of that comes along with Brian Flores is very, very, very good at his job. He's one of the most innovative defensive coordinators in the league. But, nobody's a miracle worker. So that's one thing that we're going to really be watching throughout training camp is, where are these young players or less experienced players at? Because Flores' defense, well, it's great, it's also complex. So will it take half the season for these guys to get going? And if that's the case, then, they could be relying a lot on Kyler Murray in the offense.
Dude is a genius as far as defensive scheming goes. It'll be interesting what he comes up with. You mentioned our sponsor, FanDuel. I want to get back to them for a second, because they say that the Vikings will finish last in the division, but they've set the over-under at 8.5 wins. Matthew, are you taking the over or the under?
I am taking the over. We're setting the bar at probably more like 11 wins, but it also feels like the most, tell me if you agree with this, I think the Vikings are the most volatile team in the division, even though, coaching tends to, when you have a bad year, you still finish 9-8, like the Vikings did last year. But at the same time, we have no idea what Kyler Murray is going to look like. We have no idea if Kyler Murray is going to stay healthy for an entire season. He did play 30 games in a row before he had this foot injury in Arizona that took him out last year, and then they just benched him to tank. But aside from that, like, he had a stretch of health, but his career does have some injuries that have kept him out for a long time. If the Vikings play 3 different quarterbacks again, I don't know. Like, I don't know how you're getting over the 8.5 with the defense not being as veteran as it was last year. But I think when you kind of put it all in a pot of how the offense has performed when there's been a veteran starting quarterback in there, they should at least be a 10-win type of football team. And there's a lot of pressure on everybody. Kevin O'Connell, even, Brian Flores, like they brought him back at the highest price in the NFL for a defensive coordinator. Not that I think that these guys are necessarily on the hot seat because of what they've proven, but I do think that there's a ton of pressure on Flores to develop players quickly, Kevin O'Connell to get the team back to the playoffs. They have not won a playoff game since 2019, which is now feeling really far away, man. Like once the last, it's been that long. I mean, you're talking about, kids going into like fourth grade who have never seen a playoff win. That's not good or whatever. I guess maybe my math's a little off there. I guess it'd be like second grade, but still that's way too long. Right. Here's something that I'd love you to talk me into though, is you kind of casually just said that you're fading the Green Bay Packers. I would love you to talk me into the Packers, and I'm sure my audience would as well, and so would yours. The Packers finishing 4th out of 4 in the NFC North.
You know what? And that is my prediction, that they will finish 4th out of 4 in the NFC North. And here's why. You talked about their defense is the Micah Parsons show. And you talked about how competitive this division is. And any slippage at all, the margins are so thin that you can't afford it. So when you're missing that key element to start your season, and every game is so important, I don't see them getting a good start out of the gate. Their wide receiver room is in flux. They're going to have to – I'm not convinced on Matthew Golden right now. You lose Romeo Dobbs. You're trying to integrate new guys. I just don't think the chemistry is going to be there offensively. Question marks on defense, and right out of the gate trying to figure some things out right now. And you mentioned Matt LaFleur and what he's got to work out with the whole program right now. I don't think they get this ship righted for several weeks into the season, and several weeks into the season is going to be too late. They're going to be catching and chasing the game from game one in this division. I don't see them catching up. They're going to get a slow start. That's my prediction. They're not going to get out of the basement, and that's where they're going to end up when the final horn goes. That's where I think the Green Bay Packers will be 4th in the NFC North because of the start, because there's no room for error, because the margins are that thin, and the next man up mentality where you can't replace a guy like Micah Parsons. The difference is going to be that much, I feel.
And the Vikings get very lucky playing them in week 1 because they will not have Micah Parsons, and it's just a completely different defense.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. I would say that I'm like 68% talked into this because I think that you make a good case. The only thing is that Matt LaFleur just always seems to have a way of getting this Green Bay Packers team to be mediocre, to get them to 9, 10 wins, 11 wins, somewhere in that range. Hasn't really since, MVP Rodgers gone into the playoffs with a team that you'd say like this team has a great chance to win the Super Bowl. Really, in the Jordan Love, it was like a surprise in 2023, and then 2024 is a pretty big disappointment. Last year is an enormous disappointment as they blow a 21-3 lead. I do look at their roster and go, show me. Like it was interesting.
Yeah,
right. There was an ESPN article that had them as a top 10 roster, and I thought, well, I mean, if we're weighing Micah Parsons, if he was playing 17 games, I guess that one superstar player, I could see why that you would do that. But then you go around the rest of the defense, and it is really the thing. And Josh Jacobs, he is at that point where running backs start to fall off. Their offensive line is enormously improved. So
is he going to have legal troubles to deal with? Right. Is he going to be on the field all year? That's another question about him.
Absolutely. So you're really asking Jordan Love to put a lot on his shoulders, which he is an erratic quarterback where he can be absolutely incredible or he can really struggle. So I could see this if they stumble at all out of the gate and get behind, it's going to be really hard to catch up in the NFC North. So I'm mostly talked into that, but also I think you could talk me into any of these teams being 4th because you can see the flaws. How about you give me one for the Bears? We haven't really talked about the Bears. So you give me a talk me into with the Bears.
That's where I wanted to go with you. And talk me into the fact that Ben Johnson is not in the mind of Matt LaFleur, is not in the heads of the Green Bay Packers. The way he chirped them last year, big wins in the playoffs, knocked them out, didn't shake hands after. And he's like, he basically called them out And his team performed against them last year. Talk me into the fact that Ben Johnson and the Bears are not in the heads of the Green Bay Packers right now.
Yeah. Okay. So not in the heads of the Green Bay Packers. It's
Glad
pretty
you-
compelling. It's pretty compelling to say that they are. And well, you might also say that everyone who plays the Packers in the playoffs recently has been in the head of Matt LaFleur and the Packers because of their number of meltdowns. Not that, there's been Super Bowls here in Minnesota or there in Detroit. So we can't totally trash them. But yeah, I think that with that stuff, Ben Johnson, was trying to like assert himself in Chicago, like make a lot of pomp and circumstance out of it, a lot of noise out of it, of like, we're different now. I'm showing everybody, I'm showing the city that we're different now. I'm showing, the locker room and all that stuff. And there was a lot of his personality that came out last year that I honestly didn't know that he was there when he was the offensive coordinator for the Lions. It seemed like he was kind of the nerd, calling in the plays, but he really kind of showed some of the Dan Campbell teeth last year, which I thought, worked out really well for them. And it's what they needed. But, the Packers are a very experienced team, and the loss last year was obviously embarrassing for them to lose 21-3. But they have a quarterback who at this moment is still better than Caleb Williams, in my opinion. And Matt LaFleur has been a coach for quite a long time. And actually, when you look up Matt LaFleur's regular season win percentage, I mean, he's one of the, I don't know, like top 25 in NFL history with this many games coached. I don't know that what Ben Johnson says or shakes hands or anything else. And I also think, too, that, the NFL has a way of the minute you get cocky, the minute you think, no, we can't be beat. We're the best, of kind of reminding you that you can. And I think that will be the case for Chicago this year, that, add me to the 10,000 people using the word regression with them, but it's really, really hard to repeat what they did last year, which was, and I saw this in 2022 with the Vikings, where it was late game drives. They're trailing in the second half. They're asking Caleb Williams to play hero the entire time. And, they were one kickoff away from, not having the same result last year if the Vikings had just covered a kickoff and then made one stop. But their secondary has been depleted, and they tried to rebuild it. Their front seven is so unimpressive. Who are they pressuring? It seems like every quarterback is going to have clean pockets against them. It's going to take Caleb Williams being, I think, significantly better than he was last year on a consistency basis, not the highlight plays, which were mind-blowing. And it's on Ben Johnson to do that. So you can say whatever you want. You can shake whatever hand that you want. But the NFL in regression, I mean, it's usually a real thing. If you have to barely escape all these games, the chances that you're able to do that again over a long period of time, I mean, it eventually came for the Chiefs last year, and that team had so many narrow escapes with Patrick Mahomes, and he is, a much better quarterback than Caleb Williams. So I think all that noise stuff probably impacts the people involved a lot less than the fact that the Bears, I look at their roster and go, where did they get better from last year? And I don't really see it.
I'm 70% convinced, because they are professionals and they are guys who will remember that sort of thing. The game is a humbling one, but that was very entertaining stuff. I thought it was extremely entertaining nonetheless. I love it when people, put it out there like that. So it was entertaining. I am pretty much convinced that it's not in their heads, but like I say, it was a lot of fun to watch. That's for sure.
All right. How about this before we close it up, Trevor? How about we each just give one storyline that only somebody who would be paying really a close attention to their team's training camp would be talking about? So give me like the one, like go deep in the weeds, either player or position group or assistant coach or whatever, that if you're not in Detroit, you would not realize that this is going to be a storyline. So dig deep in the bag and give me what you're looking for.
I think if you're a hardcore football fan, maybe you're paying a bit of attention to this. Otherwise, if you're just a Lions fan, your eyes are really glued to their offensive line. Penei Sewell moving over to left tackle is a big deal. They drafted Blake Miller in the first round to play right tackle. What are they going to do there? Then they brought in Cade Mays to be the center. That Frank Ragnow loss is going to echo for years and years and years to come. He was such a dominant player at that position, and that's a position you need to get right on your football field if you want to have success. It really did help drive their offense, especially their run game, when they had a Frank Ragnow. Replacing him, you can't replace him. But finding out what Cade Mays can do now that the Graham Glasgow experience is over is really going to be where the eyes are. So those three guys on the offensive line, Penei Sewell at the left tackle, Blake Miller at the right tackle, and Cade Mays at center, and how this line comes together and how they perform in front of Jahmyr Gibbs and how they perform and allow these weapons like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams to get loose and do their thing. And again, another healthy Sam Laporta is going to be a big deal. That's something we'll be watching as well at tight end, one of the best in the league at that position, but he's got coming off of back surgery. We'll be watching that. But how that offensive line performs in front of those guys is going to be where all eyes are glued coming in outside of that DB room, but all eyes are going to be glued on that offensive line and see how these guys progress.
I'm so interested to hear about how Penei Sewell transfers over to left tackle, because I think it is still different in the NFL. There's a lot of great rushers that come off the right side, and then saying to Blake Miller, hey buddy, there's like huge expectations on this team, and the clock is ticking on this core with them getting older and more expensive, but can you just like play right tackle, and play against the best players in the NFL? I think that's going to be quite the challenge. I will also highlight the center position that the Vikings are going with Blake Brandel at center. They didn't go out and sign somebody else, and he is a draft pick as a tackle years ago, then a swing tackle, then moved to guard, and then last year was forced to play center, even though he had never played center before, never even in front of us in training camp, taken a snap in practice. And it was like, okay, go out there. And his first two games were against Cleveland and Philly, who had two of the best defensive lines in the NFL. And it was a journey last year with him, but they decided, and I mean, in part because salary cap space, and the way that the draft played out, like maybe if Jake Slaughter had made it to a certain point in the draft, or Logan Jones, they would have taken them, but they didn't get there into the third round. So the Vikings are kind of stuck with playing a converted one swing tackle, then converted guard, and now into converted center. And that's the head of the snake here, especially with either a new quarterback or an inexperienced quarterback. And they're asking him to sort through all the different things. As you mentioned, I mean, Frank Ragnow is just, one of the best of the last 10 years at not just playing, one-on-one against bigger guys, but sorting through all that stuff. The leadership element is so freaking important at center. And this is going to be a completely new guy leading an offensive line that I think we know has to be very good for it. Doesn't have to be number one.
Absolutely.
Right. It has to be very good. So both teams in the trenches will be worth watching. Also, the Terrion Arnold trial. I guess we're keeping track of that, although he's not a Lion anymore.
Right.
There's many teams. I'm not going to name them, but there's many teams interested. Sure, there are. Anyway, on Twitter, I am Trevor T, and the show is Believe in Lions. We've had Glover Quinn on the show before, and he was nice enough not to talk trash about how well he performed against the Vikings over the years. So if people want some insight into what's going on in the NFC North, they should absolutely check out your show.
That was a lot of fun, Matthew. I really do appreciate your time here on Believe in Lions. When the Lions and the Vikings match up this season, we'd love to have you back on and do a preview or a review and talk about how those matchups went this season as they battle it out in the NFC North. You going to make time for us in the future?
Absolutely, Trevor. Thanks for having me, man.
Dude, it was a lot of fun. Thank you. Matthew Coller, the host of the Purple Insider. Check out his stuff on X when you want to know about the Vikings and you're following the rest of the NFC North. For now, we'll wrap up this edition of Believe in Lions, brought to you by FanDuel. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, be sure to share and enjoy, and we'll see you next time on Believe in Lions, everybody. Have yourselves a great week.